Good Tuesday morning to everybody out there listening. This is the Call Sheet Daily Podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Smith. Hope everybody had a great Memorial Day weekend. If you missed yesterday's show, I profiled the life and legacy of Pat Tillman. Most people probably somewhat familiar with his story, but he was a great profile for Memorial Day. A lot of very, very interesting topics and questions arise when you begin to talk about Pat Tillman, his legacy, his sacrifice. But today's a special episode because yesterday's show on Pat Tillman was the 100th episode of the Call Sheet Daily since it's gone to its 5-day-a-week, Monday through Friday format. And I wanted to take today to just reflect a little bit on things I've learned in this new venture, in this new chapter of my life. Those of you who have listened for a long time know that, hey, for 33 years, I was a high school history and government teacher, a football coach for almost all of that time. And while I'm continuing on as a football coach, albeit in a different role, no longer the head coach, the venture into this podcast world has been really the new and exciting chapter to have opened in my life. And it's taken me into a world of which I knew nothing. And after 33 years of teaching in the public sector, the transition to work at home in the private sector has been fascinating. And I wanted to share some things that I think are probably pretty universal, things that people listening can relate to. So, all right, what are the big takeaways? I've got 4 things I want to talk about real quick. And the first one is that the transition into the private sector is so vastly different from what I was used to for so long. As I record this, it is about 8 o'clock on Tuesday morning. So for 33 years, 8 o'clock on a Tuesday morning meant that I was standing in front of a room full of 17 and 18-year-olds. I predominantly taught juniors and seniors for all that time. And the challenge before me was to try to motivate them and keep them interested in whatever subject we were addressing, whether it be 20th century American history, whether it be government and politics, whatever. And that's a challenge in and of itself because it's like a performance. I think people look at teaching as though it's an exercise whereby you follow a curriculum and you disseminate information, you teach a skill, but it's as much about entertainment as it is about anything else. Don't think for a second that 17-year-olds will pay attention to you out of respect or because they think that it's the right thing to do. They will not. They will not. You've got to find a way to capture their attention. You've got to find a way to entertain them. And at 8 o'clock on a Tuesday morning, especially on a day like today, the day after Memorial Day, where there's 3 more weeks of school, but everybody knows the deal. Everybody knows like the year's really over. The learning portion of the year, the building, what are you building towards? At this point, nothing. AP exams are over. Standardized tests are over. All anybody wants to do is get the summer vacation. The challenge of motivating a room full of 17-year-olds in that circumstance is significant. But I think the thing that is so different for me, because there are some very, very similar aspects of trying to entertain a room full of 17-year-olds and a podcast audience. I think the thing that's fascinating for me is I can go to the bathroom whenever I want. For 33 years, I had to schedule when I went to the bathroom because you operated on a bell schedule, a set schedule. I can finish this right now and get up and go downstairs and make breakfast. It's just that I had a really hard time acclimating to freedom. That might sound weird, but by being so structured for so long and then not having any structure, it was a real significant transition. The other transition is that when you work at home, those of you who work at home probably understand this, you are not restricted from when to work. when I worked at school, it was 7:50 in the morning to 2:50 in the afternoon. And then, of course, the coaching after it. But when I wasn't coaching, if I wanted to leave at 2:50, I was out the door. And that was really the end of my day. I left my work in the classroom. Here, working out of my office at home, anytime an idea hits, anytime there's an unfinished thought, anytime I want to build on something, create new content, etc., here it is. I can go do it. My wife says, I see you less now than I did when you worked at school. And she might be right about that, because it's just this ongoing process. If it's 9:00 at night and suddenly something hits, I want to write about something, boom, here we go. That is refreshing, but it's also something you have to discipline yourself. Like, hey man, don't forget to read your daughter a book before bedtime. Don't lock yourself in the office. So just very, very different worlds, the private and the public sector. There's also the issue of incentivization. Like, I get incentivized to do things here. If the podcast does really well and we do X number of downloads, I could get a raise. If our performance is good, I could get a raise. At school, not like that, man. That's the communist element of it. You might be the best teacher in the building. You might be the worst teacher in the building. Doesn't matter. You're getting paid according to what the salary guide says. What is your incentive other than self-respect to be great in the classroom? That is one of the downfalls of the public sector. In the private sector, the incentive to be great is you can get paid more. In the public sector, the incentive to be great is self-respect and pride and wanting your students to do well. And those are two different motivating factors. Here's the second big takeaway. The challenge of content creation is fascinating. I said a minute ago that I think that doing a podcast and teaching a room full of students are similar in that you have to entertain. Obviously, it's different when you're doing it live in front of real people versus doing it as a recording in front of a microphone. And obviously, it's different when those 17-year-olds bring a host of their own issues into that room that you have to manage. But the idea of creating content for an audience is clearly not foreign for me. But I also understand I've entered a world where there's incredible competition for attention. This is a saturated market. There's a lot of people doing podcasts. There's a lot of people doing shows about football. Why should you listen to me? Why should you listen to any of us here at the Fans First Sports Network? Hopefully it's because we're creating content worthy of your attention. We are challenging you in some way. We are presenting you with something that is worth your, in this instance, 20 minutes. Why should you tune into us or to me? Because I want to give you something that makes you think a little bit. I want to offer you something that provides a new perspective. I hope that after 20 minutes of listening to this show, you've walked away with something meaningful. And that can be a challenge when you're trying to grind out 5 shows a week. So I think you have to be passionate about your subject, whatever it might be. You're doing a true crime podcast. You're doing a history podcast. Heck, man, you're doing a gossip podcast. You're doing a podcast on what's going on with celebrities in Hollywood. There's a huge audience for that. Well, whatever it is, be passionate about it. Care about it. If you don't care about your subject, how's your audience going to care about your subject? One thing I learned early on as a podcaster was like you're not live, but you better bring an energy that makes it feel live. Because when I go back and I listen to some of my earliest shows, I'm like, oh boy, you better pick up the energy, son. You got to pick up the energy and you got to clean things up. You can't have a lot of likes in your nose and these things we fall back on sometimes when there's a moment of silence and we feel we have to keep talking to fill the silence. Silence can be okay. You can pause. You can gather a thought. You don't have to fill it with ticks because you don't know what else to say. Sometimes saying nothing is fine. So being genuine, being passionate, being creative, being motivated, giving people a reason to tune into you has been a challenge. and one that I believe is hopefully part of the process that I'll get better at it as I go, that we as a network at Fans First will get better at it as we go. Here's the third takeaway. The game of football, which has meant so much to me in my life. I started rooting for the Pittsburgh Steelers when I was about 6 years old, and I remain a fan of the Steelers now, almost 50 years later. I started playing football when I was 8 years old. I played straight through college. I immediately went into coaching. And other than a 3-year stretch where I took off to get a master's degree, I've been coaching nonstop. I've been every single fall of my life since I was 8 years old has involved football. I thought I knew a lot about it. And then I started doing this show. And I began to realize how much I didn't know. Not simply about the X and O's, but about how deep and vast the game of football really is. It's that proverbial onion where you start to peel it back. You just keep finding layers and layers and layers. There is so much to talk about. The game of football, to call it a game would be to do it a disservice. It's really the institution of football because it involves, yes, the game itself. And we try to do some of that by talking about this kind of from a fan perspective. Each week now, as we are in the spring and into the summer, as we build towards the season, each Thursday now I'm doing a State of the Franchise episode where we profile a different team each week. This past week, we had Rob Guerrera from the Stats on Fire podcast on. He was great doing a profile on the San Francisco 49ers. This week, it'll be the New York Giants. It's a different team every week. And that tries to address some of the fan issues of the show, of the sport. We do the X and O's. Wednesdays are usually Whiteboard Wednesday episodes where we bring a coach on and we talk about the X and O's, the scheme. I'm going to get to that in a minute. We try to do the business of football. Things like the CBA, things like what's going on with the owners, with contract situations. When we talk about college football, we did a show on Nico Iamaleava, the former Tennessee quarterback, and his NIL demands. Football is a business as much as it is anything else. And to ignore that part of it would be silly. I try to do the history of the game. What a rich history this sport has. What a history that intersects with the history of the country. Football has evolved schematically, but also in terms of its interest to the American public from what when it really first started was predominantly a college sport. The college game was much bigger than the NFL for a long time. And it wasn't really until television boomed because football is such a great TV sport. And the networks were able to bring it into your living room on a weekly basis during the season that football became king. And we really try to tell the history of the game because it's a fascinating history. And then obviously there's a human element, telling these human stories like I did yesterday with Pat Tillman and being able to look at the amazing stories of the individuals who have shaped the game has been fascinating. There's ethical issues. I mentioned NIL. The NFL has stumbled at times over things like steroids and concussions. There are questions about whether youth sports are being done properly, the money grabs that exist. I had Marcus Hammond on a couple of weeks ago, who has started one of the most successful 7-on-7 teams in the country. He's also a high school coach at Roman Catholic High in Philadelphia, but he was talking about the business of 7-on-7. That's a polarizing subject because, again, some people think it's a money grab that teaches bad habits. He had a very different perspective. It was a very interesting interview. Hey, we've even brought in gambling, right? With my buddy Pez from Pez's Picks, who's been phenomenal, by the way. I mean, my gosh, I don't know what your perspective on gambling is, but if you haven't been following Pez from Pez's Picks and you're interested in wagering on the sport or even on the fantasy football aspect of it, he's been amazing. Better than all the national guys in terms of his accuracy. So there's so much. It's so rich. And it's richer, I think, than I believed when I was really just focusing on it from a coaching perspective. And the last thing I'll say is just that. My fourth takeaway is that this has been an absolute pleasure for me because of all of the coaches I've had an opportunity to talk to who are so smart and so passionate and so good at what they do. Before I started to do this on a daily basis, I had a weekly show that I just called The Call Sheet. And I did 80 some episodes of that just on Wednesdays. And one of my favorite episodes was when I got to sit down with Cleveland Browns head coach Kevin Stefanski and pick his brain for a good 25 minutes or so, just about quarterback play. And if you ever want to see that, you can just go to YouTube and search The Call Sheet with Kevin Stefanski. And Kevin and I are sitting in a weight room, Ocean City High School weight room, and the sound quality sucks. It was a very low budget production, but it's a great talk. And he has been fabulous. I've had the pleasure to get to know him a little bit, and he has been fabulous and generous in sharing his knowledge of the game with me. And he's just one example of many, many great coaches. He's the most high profile guy. He's the head coach of the Cleveland Browns. He's a 2-time coach of the year. He's the most high profile coach. But so many of the others, whether they're high school coaches, college, pro coaches, have been able to share their expertise of the game. Mike talked with Phil Longo about a month ago, head football coach at Sam Houston State University in Texas. And Phil's former OC at places like Wisconsin and North Carolina. And he's really a guru in the air raid offense. I learned so much talking with Phil about the air raid, how it works, how you coach it, how you practice it, etc. Just last week, I on Chuck Donahue, legendary coach here in the state of New Jersey. He's been a head coach in the state of New Jersey for 50 years. He's one of the only coaches in state history to take 3 separate programs to a state title. Listening to Chuck share his lessons learned or his reflections on life as a head coach and his time in football for 50 years is a rare thing. How many guys like that even exist in the country? The single most downloaded show I have done in these 100 episodes has been with a guy named Sal Marquez, another legendary coach. He's won a dozen state titles when he was the head coach at Delsea Regional. And the episode I did entitled How to Build Toughness in a Football Program with Sal is the most downloaded episode I've done. And the reason I believe it is because that's a fascinating question that people want to know. This guy won 12 state titles, and the reputation of his teams was that they were going to be tougher than you. How did he get them to be that way? How did he get them? That's a fascinating question, and I think people were very interested in it because today's athletes have a reputation of maybe not being as tough as they once did. How does this guy continue to turn out tough football teams in an environment where kids are often not asked to do tough things? I had a great talk with Matt Lombardi, who's coaching now at the University of North Carolina, has coached in the NFL and at many different college stops, about what's it like with working with Bill Belichick. And he has been obviously all over the country, coached with some great names in the sport. And I asked him, what's it been like working with these highly successful people? Coaches like Matt Rule and Dan Lanning and Bobby Petrino, guys like that. And he said the one commonality in all of them is that they hate to lose, that they have a burning desire to win. And that burning desire drives them to get up at 4:00 in the morning. So they're in the office at 5 in the off season because they don't want to leave any stone unturned. All of the high school coaches I've interviewed in my Whiteboard Wednesday segments have provided me something new, brought me something that I didn't know about the game before or a new perspective. Even sitting down with Paul Callahan, who will be who's a regular guest on the show, who I've worked with now for the better part of a decade, who I have learned so much football from. Paul's going to be on tomorrow, our Whiteboard Wednesday segment tomorrow, where we talk about 2-minute offense and how you build that into your program. But I learned stuff from, I coach with Paul. I'm with Paul almost every day. And just by doing these shows, I'm learning from Paul. Learning from coaches, learning from people who share my passion for the game. More than anything else, more than any other takeaway, that's been the thing that's been most rewarding for me. So thank you to everybody who has tuned in. If you're a regular listener, thank you so much. If you're new to the podcast, every Monday through Friday, show usually drops around 9 a.m. I appreciate any time you give us. I know there's competition for your time and for your interest. And thank you for giving us the opportunity here to share a little bit of what we know and impart it in a way that hopefully is enjoyable for you. So 100 episodes in the book, and I hope we get better as we go, onward and upward. So thank you again. And for Kevin Smith, this is the Call Sheet Daily. Join us tomorrow for Whiteboard Wednesday with Coach Callahan as we talk about 2-minute offense. And then on Thursday, as we talk about state of the franchise, the New York Giants. And then on Friday, as we do the hot route with my man Pez, conversations about football and life. Going to be fun stuff. Hope you'll tune in the rest of the week. Have a great Tuesday, everybody. Thank you again.